Who could keep a pharaoh in check? No one. When you ruled like a god, you answered to no one. From burying servants alive to literally erasing enemies like they never existed, these ancient rulers did whatever they pleased. Here are 20 things the pharaohs did you won't believe. Burying servants alive for the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife wasn't just a belief, it was an obsession. And for some pharaohs, that meant ensuring their needs would be met even after death. But how? By taking their loyal servants with them, alive. Historical records and archaeological findings reveal that in the early dynasties, pharaohs didn't hesitate to have their servants buried alive alongside them. The belief was that these attendants would continue serving their king in the next world, just as they had in life. The practice known as retainer sacrifice was especially prominent during Egypt's first dynasty. Archaeological digs in places like Abydos have uncovered graves surrounding royal tombs, many believed to belong to sacrificed servants. Pharaohs like Jer, the third ruler of the first dynasty, were among the leaders whose tombs included such sacrificial burials. It's estimated that up to 300 people may have been sacrificed for Jer's afterlife needs. These weren't just anonymous workers, they were personal attendants, close companions, and even high-ranking officials. But by the time of later dynasties, this gruesome practice began to fade. Pharaohs found less horrifying ways to ensure afterlife companionship, using symbolic statues known as ushabtis, which were believed to magically serve them in the next world. Yet the sheer brutality of those earlier times still shocks historians today. Why did it stop? Some believe the cultural mindset shifted as Egypt grew more advanced, while others argue that the practice became too costly or was seen as morally questionable. Either way, by the time of pharaohs like Tutankhamun or Ramesses II, retainers were left alive, replaced by lifeless figurines. Marrying siblings to preserve the divine bloodline. It sounds shocking today, but in ancient Egypt, royal incest wasn't just accepted, it was tradition. Pharaohs believed they weren't just rulers, but gods in human form. To keep their bloodlines pure and divine, many pharaohs married their own siblings. One of the most famous examples is Tutankhamun, the boy king who ascended the throne at just 9 years old. Genetic testing of his mummified remains confirmed that his parents were siblings, likely Akhenaten and his sister, whose identity is still debated. Tutankhamun himself married his half-sister Ankhesenamun, continuing the cycle. But Tutankhamun wasn't an exception. Pharaoh Akhenaten himself is believed to have been married to Nefertiti, but some sources suggest he also took his daughters as consorts to strengthen his claim to divinity. Meanwhile, Cleopatra VII, centuries later, married her younger brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, to uphold tradition and secure her power. This wasn't just about love or family, it was about power, politics, and maintaining the appearance of divine authority. Dying young due to incest. Marrying outside the royal family was seen as diluting the bloodline, a betrayal of their godlike status. But the cost was high. Inbreeding led to genetic disorders, physical deformities, and fragile health. Some historians believe that many early deaths among the royal family, including mysterious miscarriages and infant deaths, were linked to these practices. Tutankhamun suffered from multiple health issues, including a cleft palate, clubfoot, and bone necrosis. Evidence also points to malaria and a weakened immune system, which likely contributed to his death at just 19 years old. But he wasn't alone in this tragic pattern. Incestuous unions were common among pharaohs, seen as a way to preserve divine legitimacy. Cleopatra VII, centuries later, married her younger brothers, while pharaohs like Akhenaten possibly took daughters as consorts to strengthen his divine claim. In their eyes, if the gods were immortal and perfect, their human descendants had to be pure to maintain that connection. Despite the risks, the tradition persisted. Marrying outside the royal bloodline was unthinkable, as it was believed to dilute their divine essence. Pharaohs accepted these tragic consequences as the price of maintaining godlike status, commanding entire cities for tombs. When it came to preparing for the afterlife, pharaohs didn't just plan for a tomb, they built entire cities. The construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza under Pharaoh Khufu around 2580 to 2560 BCE wasn't just a monumental architectural feat, it was an act of national mobilization. Entire populations were forced into labor, dedicating their lives to ensuring their rulers' eternal legacy. Historical evidence shows that tens of thousands of workers, including farmers, craftsmen and slaves, were conscripted to build the colossal tomb. During the agricultural off-season, when the Nile flooded and farmland lay submerged, Egyptians were drafted to work on the pyramid. Some were paid labourers, but many were bound by obligation, providing service as a form of tax. Massive support cities sprang up to house and feed these workers, complete with bakeries, breweries and medical facilities. Archaeological finds have uncovered remnants of these bustling, temporary cities near the pyramid sites. But not all workers were volunteers. Pharaohs wielded absolute power, and conscription was a national duty. For some, refusing wasn't an option. Pharaoh Sneferu, Khufu's father, also mobilized massive workforces for his multiple pyramid projects, each failure adding to the eventual perfection of his son's Great Pyramid. These labor cities weren't just work camps, they were micro-economies designed to sustain the enormous workforce. Despite the grueling conditions, some records suggest workers were well fed, consuming meat and bread, an unusual luxury for ordinary Egyptians. Hunting hippos for sport. In ancient Egypt, the hippopotamus wasn't just a deadly beast, it was a symbol of chaos and destruction. Pharaohs, viewing themselves as divine warriors, took it upon themselves to hunt these massive creatures, not just for sport, but as a ritual of power and protection. The hippo was linked to Seth, the god of chaos, and its presence was seen as a threat to the order that pharaohs swore to uphold. Pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Ramesses II were known to participate in these dangerous hunts, demonstrating their strength and divine authority. Killing a hippo wasn't just about bravery, it was a symbolic act of defeating chaos itself. These hunts were grand spectacles. Pharaohs sailed on royal boats, armed with harpoons, while courtiers and soldiers stood by, witnessing their rulers' prowess. The danger was real. Hippos could overturn boats and crush men with ease. Legends tell of Pharaoh Nama, one of Egypt's earliest rulers, whose strength was proven through such daring hunts. But the act wasn't just for show. The pharaoh's ability to subdue the hippo symbolized his control over chaos and the protection of Egypt's sacred order. To strike down a hippo was to affirm the pharaoh's role as a guardian of Ma'at, the concept of balance and harmony. However, these hunts also carried personal risk. Some historians suggest that some pharaohs met their end during such dangerous pursuits. It's believed that Nama's successor, possibly a relative, might have faced such a fate. Over time, the ritual became more ceremonial, with pharaohs depicting themselves hunting hippos in tomb reliefs and temple carvings. These images were as much about propaganda as reality, reinforcing the pharaoh's strength and divine mandate. The hunt wasn't just about killing a beast, it was about asserting dominance over the forces that threatened Egypt's survival, proving that the pharaoh's power was unmatched, even in the face of nature's most fearsome creatures. Declaring themselves gods. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs didn't just rule as kings, they ruled as living gods. The belief that pharaohs were divine wasn't just cultural, It was a cornerstone of their authority. Pharaohs like Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, took this belief to extremes, demanding worship and erecting colossal monuments to immortalize their godlike status. Ramses II wasn't subtle about his divine claims. He had enormous statues of himself carved across Egypt, including the famous Abu Simbel temples, where his likeness towered over the Nile. He ordered inscriptions that declared his victories as acts of divine will, even when battles like Kadesh ended in stalemates. According to his version of events, Ramses wasn't just a king, he was a god who commanded victory. But Ramses wasn't the only pharaoh to declare divinity. Akhenaten went even further, restructuring Egypt's entire religion to focus on a single god, Aten, with himself as the divine intermediary. He wasn't just leading worship, he was the living embodiment of Aten's will. Meanwhile, earlier pharaohs like Khufu and Sneferu also positioned themselves as god kings, ensuring their names were eternally linked with divine status. Pharaohs used temples, statues, and even their own names to cement this belief. Names like Son of Ra weren't just titles, they were public declarations of a godly lineage. Citizens were expected to offer prayers and tributes, not just to gods like Osiris or Isis, but to the pharaoh himself. But was it all for faith, or was it about control? By claiming divinity, pharaohs justified their absolute rule. Disobedience wasn't just rebellion, it was blasphemy. And for the common people, worshipping the pharaoh wasn't just loyalty, it was survival. Declaring themselves gods wasn't just a claim of power, it was a masterstroke of politics and religion, ensuring that pharaohs ruled not just the land of the living, but the realms of the divine. Building hidden death traps to deter grave robbers. In ancient Egypt, death was just the beginning, but protecting that afterlife journey was a deadly game. Pharaohs, obsessed with safeguarding their tombs, turned burial chambers into deadly fortresses. To deter grave robbers, they designed complex and lethal traps, ensuring that anyone daring enough to breach their tombs risked paying with their life. Some of the earliest examples of these death traps come from the Valley of the Kings, where pharaohs like Seti I and Rameses III were entombed. These tombs weren't just hidden, they were designed to kill. Drop shafts, false doors, and hidden passageways led robbers into dead ends or trapped them inside. Some corridors were filled with sharp stones designed to crush intruders. Others had concealed pits that dropped invaders into deadly holes, sometimes filled with spikes or jagged rocks. The ancient builders took no chances. Heavy stone slabs, weighing tons, were positioned to slide into place after the tombs were sealed, cutting off any potential looters. In some cases, curses were inscribed to psychologically terrify anyone who dared to enter. Though modern archaeologists often dismiss these as symbolic, ancient Egyptians took them seriously. The fear of supernatural retribution was as powerful as any physical trap. Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb, though smaller and less elaborate, was hidden so well that it remained untouched for over 3,000 years. Some historians believe its accidental concealment beneath another tomb saved it from looters. Meanwhile, pharaohs like Rameses II went to great lengths, designing their tombs deep within mountains and masking the entrances with rock and sand. But even with these efforts, many tombs were still plundered. It became an arms race between the living and the dead, with pharaohs creating more sophisticated traps while robbers grew more daring. Erasing enemies from history. Ancient Egyptian rulers mastered the art of damnatio memoriae, systematically erasing rivals and disgraced figures from monuments, statues, and records to ensure they were forgotten for eternity. One of the most infamous examples is Pharaoh Hatshepsut, Egypt's powerful female ruler. After her death, her successor and stepson, Thutmose III, launched a campaign to erase her legacy. Her images were chiseled off temple walls, her statues smashed, and inscriptions bearing her name were obliterated. Why? Some believe it was an attempt to solidify Thutmose's own claim to power, while others suggest it was a bid to restore traditional male dominance after Hatshepsut's unprecedented female reign. But Hatshepsut wasn't alone. Pharaoh Akhenaten, who radically transformed Egypt's religion by promoting the worship of Aten, faced similar erasure. After his death, his successor Tutankhamun and later pharaohs worked to dismantle Akhenaten's religious reforms and chisel his name from monuments. It was a calculated move to restore traditional beliefs and distance themselves from his controversial legacy. Erasing a name wasn't just political, it was spiritual. Ancient Egyptians believed that to be remembered was to exist eternally. Destroying someone's name and image meant condemning them to oblivion, stripping them of their afterlife. Ironically, these acts of historical erasure didn't always succeed. Modern archaeology has resurrected many of these forgotten pharaohs, their stories pieced together from broken fragments and hidden inscriptions. Yet the extent of this ancient censorship reveals how fiercely pharaohs guarded their legacies and how far they were willing to go to destroy their enemies, even from beyond the grave. Mass sacrifices for the afterlife. During Egypt's first dynasty, sacrifices were a grim reality. Archaeological findings from tombs in Abydos suggest that hundreds of retainers were killed and buried alongside their pharaohs. For example, Pharaoh Jer's tomb contains burial sites for an estimated 300 individuals, believed to be servants, guards, and companions intended to serve him in the afterlife. But it wasn't just human lives. Animals held deep spiritual significance, and mass sacrifices of sacred creatures were common. Apis bulls, believed to be earthly manifestations of gods, were ritually slaughtered and buried in elaborate ceremonies. Pharaohs believed that such sacrifices would strengthen their spiritual journey and curry favor with the deities. Pharaoh Khufu, known for the Great Pyramid, is speculated to have overseen mass sacrifices, although much of this remains debated. Some theories suggest that ceremonial killings were part of royal funerals, symbolizing the pharaoh's power and ensuring that their spiritual entourage would be complete in the afterlife. Yet as Egypt progressed, the practice of human sacrifice waned, replaced by ushabtis, figurines believed to come to life and serve the pharaoh in death. Whether this shift was moral or practical is still questioned by scholars. Regardless, the traces of these ancient sacrifices still echo through burial sites and tombs. They reveal a society deeply entwined with its beliefs, where life and death were connected through rituals of blood and devotion. Even today, these discoveries force us to confront the brutal realities of ancient Egyptian culture and the terrifying lengths pharaohs went to secure their place in eternity. Waging wars over love affairs. In ancient Egypt, love wasn't just a personal affair. It was a matter of politics, power, and sometimes even war. Take Ramses II, one of Egypt's most legendary rulers, whose romantic pursuits may have played a role in the infamous Battle of Kadesh. While the official reason for the battle was territorial dispute against the Hittites, some historians speculate that personal and political relationships heightened tensions. Ramses II had multiple wives, but his love for Queen Nefertari was unmatched. Inscriptions and temples like the Grand Abu Simbel glorify her alongside Ramses as a beloved queen and symbol of unity. Some theories suggest that alliances or conflicts over royal marriages with foreign kingdoms, like the Hittites, may have contributed to Ramses's aggressive military campaigns. Similarly, Egyptian rulers often formed marriages with foreign princesses to secure alliances. When these arrangements soured, it wasn't uncommon for tensions to escalate into warfare. The pharaoh's heart wasn't just his own, it was a strategic weapon, and broken alliances could spiral into bloodshed. Even pharaohs like Amenhotep III engaged in love-driven diplomacy, marrying foreign brides to solidify peace. However, if trust was broken or terms were dishonored, military action wasn't far behind. Of course, these romantic motives were often masked by grand declarations of protecting borders or expanding power. Yet beneath the surface, personal desires and affairs of the heart may have played a significant role in igniting some of Egypt's fiercest conflicts. Rewriting history and erasing failures. In ancient Egypt, military failure wasn't just a personal loss, it was a threat to their divine image. Pharaohs were considered gods on earth, chosen to lead Egypt to glory. To admit defeat would be to admit weakness, so they took the ultimate shortcut, rewriting history. No pharaoh is more infamous for this than Ramesses II. In 1274 BCE, he led his forces against the Hittites in the famous Battle of Kadesh, one of the largest chariot confrontations in history. The real outcome? A brutal stalemate, with heavy losses on both sides and Ramesses barely escaping with his life. Eventually, Egypt and the Hittites signed one of the world's earliest recorded peace treaties. But you wouldn't know that from Ramesses' records. Temple reliefs at Abu Simbel and Luxor depict him as a fearless conqueror, charging into enemy lines and securing divine victory. His inscriptions portray him as an unstoppable force, chosen by the gods. But Ramesses wasn't alone in rewriting reality. Pharaoh Thutmose III, hailed as Egypt's greatest military strategist, led campaigns into Canaan and Syria. Egyptian records detail overwhelming victories, yet foreign sources suggest setbacks and retreats. Stories mysteriously absent from Egyptian monuments. His failures were deliberately erased, ensuring his image remained flawless. Even Amenhotep II took part in this historical deception. His inscriptions boast of impossible feats, claiming single-handed victories against massive enemy forces. Yet, gaps in the records hint at hidden failures, deliberately omitted to preserve his godlike image. These cover-ups weren't just about pride. Pharaohs believed military success confirmed their favour with the gods. To acknowledge defeat was to risk losing divine legitimacy. So they rewrote history, transforming disasters into triumphs, ensuring they'd be remembered as invincible rulers. Looting rival tombs to repurpose wealth. Pharaohs were buried with unimaginable treasures, but not all gold remained undisturbed. Some rulers, driven by greed or necessity, looted the tombs of their predecessors to repurpose wealth and materials for their own grandeur. Evidence suggests that pharaohs like Ramesses IX were notorious for this. During his reign, Egypt faced severe economic decline and resources were scarce. As a result, the tombs of previous rulers were raided, not by common thieves, but possibly under royal orders. Gold and precious artifacts were stripped, and even mummies were desecrated, their treasures melted down or recycled for newer projects. Pharaoh Horemheb, who rose to power after Tutankhamun, is believed to have dismantled monuments of previous rulers, repurposing stone blocks and erasing their names. This wasn't just about wealth, it was about rewriting history and claiming resources for his own legacy. Ironically, this erasure preserved many artifacts, as hidden inscriptions were later rediscovered by archaeologists. Even Ramesses II, known for his grand construction projects, likely sourced materials from older, less prominent tombs. Stone, gold, and artifacts were too valuable to leave buried, especially when they could enhance a current pharaoh's reign. This looting wasn't just an act of desperation, it was calculated and political. By erasing a predecessor's legacy, a pharaoh could claim superiority, asserting dominance over both the living and the dead. While some tombs, like Tutankhamun's, remained hidden and untouched for millennia, many others weren't so lucky. Controlling Nile floods with rituals. The Nile River was Egypt's lifeblood, but its unpredictable floods could make or break entire dynasties. Pharaohs, seen as divine mediators, were believed to possess the power to influence these floods, and they didn't take this responsibility lightly. Elaborate rituals were performed, blending faith and fear, to control the Nile's waters and ensure the survival of Egypt. Pharaohs like Amenemhat III were revered for their connection to the Nile, overseeing massive projects like the Fayum irrigation system to harness the river's flow. But beyond engineering, rituals played a crucial role. Offerings were made to Hapi, the god of the Nile, including food, precious items, and prayers. Temples along the riverbanks became ritual centers, where priests and pharaohs alike pleaded for favorable flows. The pharaoh's role was more than ceremonial. He was seen as a living deity, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the universal balance. A failure to ensure proper flooding wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a sign of divine disfavor, putting the pharaoh's legitimacy at risk. To avoid this, pharaohs conducted sacred rites, sometimes involving symbolic sacrifices of animals or objects cast into the Nile to appease the gods. Pharaoh Akhenaten, with his controversial religious reforms, disrupted traditional Nile rituals, leading to speculation that poor floods contributed to unrest during his reign. Later pharaohs, like Ramesses II, restored these customs, emphasizing their connection to the divine and the natural world. Despite these rituals, the Nile's floods remained unpredictable. Yet the belief that pharaohs could control this force shaped Egypt's political and religious landscape. Launching obelisk projects to show power. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs launched monumental obelisk projects to display their divine authority, proving their strength not just to their people, but to the gods themselves. Pharaohs like Hatshepsut led some of the most ambitious obelisk projects. At the Temple of Karnak, she commissioned the construction of some of Egypt's tallest obelisks, with one standing at a staggering 97 feet and weighing over 300 tons. The sheer scale was a political statement. As a female pharaoh, Hatshepsut faced challenges to her authority, and by erecting these massive monuments, she showcased her undeniable power. Pharaoh Thutmose III, her successor, also took to raising obelisks, ensuring his reign would be immortalized in stone. His obelisks were strategically placed in religious centers, reinforcing his role as the god's chosen leader. Later, Pharaoh Ramesses II, never one to shy away from self-glorification, erected numerous obelisks adorned with inscriptions of his divine victories. But constructing an obelisk was no easy feat. Carving, transporting, and erecting these massive stones without modern machinery was a logistical nightmare. Entire communities of workers were mobilized for years, carving the stone from quarries like Aswan and dragging it across the Nile. The act of raising an obelisk was as much a spiritual event as it was a feat of engineering. To the Egyptians, obelisks symbolized a connection between earth and the heavens, their pointed tips reaching toward the gods. Banning certain gods to reshape religion. When Pharaoh Akhenaten took the throne, he didn't just rule Egypt, he tried to rewrite its entire spiritual landscape. In one of history's boldest religious overhauls, Akhenaten banned the worship of Egypt's traditional gods, declaring Aten, the sun disk, as the one true god. This radical shift, known as the Amarna Revolution, shattered centuries of polytheistic tradition. Temples dedicated to gods like Amun, Osiris, and Isis were shut down. Priests were stripped of power, and religious iconography was destroyed. Akhenaten, demanded that worship be centered solely on Aten, with himself as the god's living intermediary. It wasn't just a religious move, it was political. By dismantling the priesthood, Akhenaten centralized power, cutting down rival influences that could challenge his authority. He even abandoned Egypt's capital, building a new city called Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, dedicated entirely to Aten. The city's architecture reflected his religious vision. Open temples allowing the sun's rays to bless every ceremony. But this radical vision wasn't widely embraced. The population, deeply rooted in traditional beliefs, resisted the forced change. Historians suggest that famine, disease and internal unrest plagued Akhenaten's reign, partly due to the disruption of the religious and economic systems that sustained Egypt's stability. After Akhenaten's death, his son Tutankhamun, perhaps under political pressure, restored the old gods. Temples to Aten were destroyed, Akhenaten's images defaced, and the name of Amun once again echoed through Egypt. Akhenaten's attempt to reshape Egypt's soul was swiftly erased, and he was branded a heretic. Manipulating oracles to control political outcomes. In ancient Egypt, the gods spoke through oracles, but sometimes it was pharaohs who put words in their mouths. Pharaohs often manipulated oracles to sway political outcomes and secure their rule. One famous example involves Hatshepsut, Egypt's first female pharaoh. To legitimize her unprecedented rise to power, she claimed that the god Amun had chosen her as ruler. Oracles, conveniently enough, confirmed this divine selection. Whether these proclamations were genuine or staged remains debated, but many historians believe Hatshepsut influenced priests and oracles to secure the god's endorsement. Pharaohs also used oracles to crush political rivals. If a threat emerged, an oracle could reveal that the gods demanded the enemy's exile or execution. This divine authority made opposition nearly impossible. Pharaoh Ramesses III is said to have used religious declarations to justify harsh punishments against conspirators in his court. Controlling religious leaders was key. Pharaohs ensured loyalty by funding temples and elevating priests who supported their agendas. Priests who aligned with the pharaoh gained wealth and status, while dissenters risked losing influence or their lives. This unspoken agreement kept Egypt's religious and political powers tightly intertwined. Unsurprisingly, the gods almost always gave the green light. Victories were declared preordained, while defeats were rarely acknowledged. The manipulation of oracles reveals the cunning behind Egypt's divine rule. Building fake cities for festivals. When ancient Egypt celebrated, it wasn't just a party. It was an epic spectacle that could reshape the landscape. Pharaohs constructed entire temporary cities for religious festivals, sparing no expense to impress gods and subjects alike. One of the grandest examples was during the Opet festival in Thebes, where pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Ramesses II oversaw massive celebrations honouring the god Amun. Temporary structures, including elaborate pavilions, ceremonial roads and even small cities, were erected to host processions, feasts and religious rituals. These cities weren't simple tents. They were grand, often built from mud bricks, lavishly decorated and designed to last for weeks or even months. Pharaoh Akhenaten took this even further. During his controversial reign, he constructed Akhetaten not just as a capital, but as a religious stage dedicated to Aten, the sun god. Though it was intended as a permanent city, some historians argue it functioned like an extended festival ground, an enormous spiritual showcase to demonstrate his devotion. These temporary cities were more than just celebrations. They were political statements, displays of power meant to impress both locals and visiting dignitaries. Pharaohs used them to reinforce their divine status, proving they could command not just armies, but entire landscapes to worship the gods. After the festivals ended, many of these cities were dismantled or abandoned, their materials repurposed for other projects. Yet the memory of their grandeur lingered, strengthening the pharaoh's legacy. Building these cities was an act of immense power and devotion, showing that for pharaohs, no expense was too great when it came to honouring the gods and reinforcing their rule. Taking animal deities as pets. In ancient Egypt, animals weren't just pets, they were sacred beings, often considered living embodiments of the gods. And for some pharaohs, keeping these animals as royal companions wasn't just about affection, it was about power, symbolism, and divine connection. Pharaohs like Ramesses II and Amenhotep III were known to keep exotic and sacred animals, such as baboons, lions, and even crocodiles, within their royal courts. These weren't just pets, they were living symbols of the gods. Baboons were associated with Thoth, the god of wisdom, while crocodiles were linked to the fierce and protective deity Sobek. Hatshepsut, Egypt's powerful female pharaoh, is believed to have kept exotic animals brought from her famous expedition to Punt, including leopards and incense trees. These animals served both as symbols of her far-reaching power and as offerings to the gods. Keeping them in her palace emphasized her ability to conquer distant lands and harness nature's power for Egypt's glory. But keeping sacred animals wasn't without ritual. These creatures were bathed, fed special diets, and adorned with jewelry. Some even had their own caretakers, priests, and attendants who ensured they were treated as divine royalty. When they died, they received elaborate burials, with mummification and ceremonies to honour their spiritual significance. The most extreme example was Sobek-Neferu, the first female pharaoh of Egypt, who worshipped the crocodile god Sobek. She likely kept crocodiles within temple enclosures, ensuring their survival and tying her rule to the fierce power Sobek symbolized. Massive gold hoarding hidden from the world. In ancient Egypt, gold wasn't just wealth, it was power. Pharaohs hoarded unimaginable amounts of it, using it to build temples, decorate tombs, and flaunt their divine status. But what's shocking is that much of this gold remains undiscovered, hidden beneath the sands of time, waiting to reveal the full extent of Egypt's opulence. Pharaoh Seti I is one of history's most notable gold hoarders. His reign, marked by extensive construction projects, demanded incredible wealth. Temples like Abydos were adorned with gold, while tombs were filled with treasures meant to accompany him into the afterlife. But it wasn't just about the afterlife. Pharaohs kept vast reserves of gold hidden in secret vaults, ensuring their wealth would remain untouched by rivals or thieves. Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered in 1922, offered a rare glimpse into the scale of royal wealth. Over 5,000 artifacts, including solid gold masks, chariots and jewellery, stunned the world. Yet his was considered a minor tomb. If such riches lay with a young, relatively insignificant pharaoh, what might have been buried with the likes of Ramesses II or Setia I? But not all hoards were buried. Pharaohs maintained secret treasuries, stockpiling gold for war, trade, or temple construction. Some believe massive caches still lie undiscovered, sealed beneath desert sands or hidden within the ruins of ancient cities. And when tombs were looted, some pharaohs went to extreme lengths to protect their wealth. Pharaoh Ramesses IX launched investigations into tomb robberies, trying to recover lost treasures and punish thieves who dared to defile the sacred. Pharaohs cursed their own tombs to terrify intruders. Ancient Egyptians believed that life continued after death, but for pharaohs, ensuring a safe and undisturbed afterlife meant taking drastic measures, even cursing their own tombs. While many know about the elaborate traps and hidden chambers designed to protect royal burials, what's less known is that some pharaohs took their protection to the supernatural level. placing curses intended to strike down anyone who dared to violate their eternal resting place. Though ancient Egypt's curses have been romanticized in modern culture, real inscriptions warning of divine retribution have been found on tombs. These weren't empty threats. The Egyptians believed that disturbing a tomb was an assault against the divine order, and the gods would unleash plagues, madness, or death upon any intruder. Pharaohs like Tutankhamun are famously linked to the curse of the pharaohs, even though his tomb didn't bear a direct curse inscription. However, after his tomb's discovery in 1922, the mysterious deaths of several expedition members fueled belief in ancient vengeance. Other tombs, such as those in Saqqara, have revealed warning inscriptions meant to strike terror into the hearts of robbers. Whether coincidence or curse, the world became fascinated by the idea that pharaohs could reach beyond death to punish those who disturbed them.